We're going to start listening to the music to Beethoven's only ballet, The Creatures of Prometheus. But this ballet, first of all, what's a ballet? A ballet are people dancing so that other people can watch them dance. It's not like ballroom dancing where people dance because they dance. This is a dance where people dance and other people watch, usually accompanied by music. And the time of Beethoven, almost usually telling a story. Modern ballets do not always tell a story, but in those days it was like a play. You sort of mimed a story. And so we're going to get to know ballet a little bit and a little bit about the creatures of Prometheus. So here's the thing. Ballets usually start, not today, but back then, with an overture. And the overtures could be one of three things. They could be like a little symphony movement, that is to say, something in sonata form. Or they could be what we call a tone poem, something that tells the story of the ballet before the ballet even begins. Or it could be a collection of the great tunes from the ballet, the greatest hits. Now, if it's sonata form, that's something the classical composers did. This is the Age of Enlightenment, those guys who wanted form, form, form. If you're trying to tell the story, or if you're trying to just collect the great tunes to sell them, those are romantic ideas. That's this romantic concept. And we're, again, trying to figure out if Beethoven is a classicist or a romanticist, and how that affects his view of the world, and how that's going to affect the world that follows. Um, so anyway, we're going to look at his music to see that. Beethoven, well, let's come back. So we have an overture. Now, why is there an overture? Back in the day, people didn't go and just sit quietly and watch operas or ballets or symphonies. It was a much more social event. The concerts could be very long, 4 hours or so, and people came in and out, and they would go to the concession stand where it appears they always got oranges. Oranges were all the rage. So you could send a drink and an orange, and you'd talk to some people, and you'd go to your private box, and you talk, you might gossip about someone in their box, who's with the countess, who's with the count, what you saw the last couple of days. It was very social. And then the music would start, and that would tell you, hey, action's coming. And people would slowly quiet down, finish their oranges, sit down, and watch some action. That's what the purpose of the overture was. But composers still took them seriously because they might end up on concert programs by themselves later on. So they were still serious works, but they really were just to quiet the audience. And then once the dance starts, the pieces tend to be very short. They're usually based on dances from the dance halls because they're the easiest thing to dance. So they might be based on waltzes or gavottes or any kind of contra dance, which are dances from that time period. But nonetheless, they're short. And let me explain why. I used to conduct ballet. And when I conducted, I usually was down the orchestra pit where I couldn't see much except the dancers' heads. But every now and then we'd have a piece without music. And I'd go into what's called the wings. That's the side of the stage, right with the actors, but so far away from them that the audience couldn't see us. We're off to the side. And I'd watch the dancers, and they would float, men and women. They'd just float across these big smiles, but they would be holding their bodies up so tight that every muscle in their body is being used, but you don't know it because they seem to glide and float. And that incredible control took so much muscle. They'd float back and forth for about a minute, maybe a minute and a half. It seems like a very short time to us sitting here. It's a very long time for using every muscle. And they'd come into the wings and with these big smiles. And as soon as the audience couldn't see them anymore, they would collapse on the floor, gasping for breath, trying to get their breath from this huge exercise. And usually, because they were dancers, they'd be cursing like sailors. But that's not really the point. The point was they were exhausted. And they would catch as much breath as they can until they heard the next music cue. Then they pop up, get a big smile, use every muscle, and float back across the stage again. So composers have to write short little pieces so the dancers can look good and get off the stage before they're totally exhausted. And these pieces come in lots of forms. There's a form called the pantomime, and this is where you're not really doing much dance, you're explaining the plot. So, you, I love you, shall we dance, is all this kind of stuff. And those can be a little bit longer because they're not as demanding. Then there are the solo dances. So the ballerina, the prima ballerina, or the male dancer may have a solo dance, and that's called a variation. In music, a variation means something entirely different. But in dance, it means a solo dance. Then there's the pas de deux, the steps of two. That's a duet, two dancers dancing together. There's a thing called a corps de ballet. That's your big ensemble of dancers, and they will have their moments where the corps gets to dance. And then the finale is called the apotheosis, or sometimes called the apotheosis. It's the big finale at the end. And the tradition, and not every ballet does this, but the tradition is after the music starts, each group that has had a solo turn before come out and sort of reprise it. So you get the music when this group comes out, and then the music changes, and another group comes out, and we get to sort of meet everybody again in time for the applause. So the apotheosis is this grand finale at the end. And that's how ballet is put together. It's a light entertainment. The music normally is kind of like a movie score. It's just there to entertain you, to support the action, and it was considered a very charming and light entertainment. Well, Beethoven wrote one ballet. He partnered with a guy named Vigano, who was a famous choreographer. That means he told dancers what to do. He was a dancer himself. He was also a composer. Then he and Beethoven put together this ballet called The Creatures of Prometheus. And you can imagine it's based on the myth. But read the scenario that are online, because it's not about bringing fire to the people. The myth is a little more complicated than that. So anyway, they have this story of Prometheus, and they start telling the story with dance and music. So we start with the overture. Are we seeing Prometheus from that Enlightenment point of view we talked about earlier? Are we seeing Prometheus from the romantic point of view? Look at the overture. Is it all about form, or is it a tone poem? What is it? Look at the libretto, the scenario. Are they emphasizing the parts of the story that are romantic, or the parts of the story that are enlightenment? And then we're going to do the apotheosis. It's just called finale, I think, in your recording. And it's a very interesting piece. It's a contra dance. That means it's a dance from that time period. But it's a dance called an anglaise, which means an English dance. The anglaise is a fascinating dance because when it's done as a ballroom dance, you switch partners all the time. So you go to a dance hall, and normally the nobles would be dancing with their people, and the other people would be dancing. Remember, everybody's got money if they're in a dance hall, but they're nobles and non-nobles. And in this dance, you start with your partner, but then you switch. And so soon the nobles are dancing with non-nobles, and vice versa. And so this dance became a symbol of democracy, the idea that people could mix and mingle as one, as equals. And so Beethoven chooses to use an anglaise as the last section of his Creatures of Prometheus. Maybe an accident, maybe not. We'll see what you think about it. So listen to those two movements. Read the scenarios first, or the librettos. Make sure you understand what the story is. And then listen to the music and use the listening maps, because they'll help you understand the form, what's happening when. And also, you'll read those scenarios and look at the video of the Baroque dance before Beethoven, where Pete was all about balance and grace, but not a lot of leaps. By the way, the dancer in that was my wife's college roommate. She's still dancing. And then the second of those little clips is a romantic dance about 50 years after Beethoven, where you'll see the leaps and the turns and all the things that made ballet so exciting. What did Beethoven's look like? Probably about halfway in between. It's hard to know. That era dance was changing, and so it's hard to know what Beethoven's dance actually looked like. But look at those videos, listen to the music, and most of all, enjoy the music. Now, we are going to have an exam on all this information. It's open book, and we're also going to have some more discussion board. All of that gets graded, but mostly enjoy the videos and enjoy the music. That's what this is all about.